The wind swept dry and biting through Broken Mesa, rattling loose boards and dragging tumbleweeds across the scorched street. Before we kick off this adventure, don't forget to hit like on the video and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Just past high noon, the sun pressed down like a branding iron, and the dirt beneath the townsfolk's boots cracked like old leather. Most had gathered near the saloon, drawn by the same cruel curiosity. In the bed of a battered wagon, a rusted iron cage creaked with every breeze. Inside, hunched down, arms wrapped around her knees, sat a woman ahiv 24. Apache wore the dust of the desert like a second skin. Her torn deerskin dress clung to her lean frame ribs, just visible through gaps in the fabric. The right side had ripped high, revealing darkened skin burned by the sun. The neckline had been split from being yanked, leaving the curve of one breast barely shielded by the fabric's edge. Her hair was thick and tangled, hanging in dry, matted strands. Her lips were cracked, her deep brown eyes hollow and sharp, too tired to blink, too proud to cry. She hadn't eaten since the morning before, hadn't truly slept in longer. No shade, no mercy. Just iron bars and greedy hands poking in like she was livestock. $5, barked Amos Tate, his face red from sun and whiskey, standing next to the wheel with a leer on his cracked lips. That's all for this fine young Apache, strong, fresh, and shaped like sin. Mark my words, she won't last long at this bargain. Laughter erupted from the townfolk of Broken Mesa, a harsh, drunk chorus that echoed against the saloon walls. She'd heard it in every damn town they'd passed, talk about her teeth, her hips, what a man might do when no one was watching. Ahiv clenched her jaw. She didn't look up. She'd learned better. Looking only brought worse, but every word still sliced beneath her skin. Worse than their jokes was the truth behind how she got here. Her own people had done it. That part never stopped hurting. A week ago, her village was starving. The riverbed dry, the food gone. Desperation made cowards of men. She had once told Takoda, the war chief's son, she would never be his. That was all it took. In exchange for safe passage and goods, she was traded, handed off like trash in the night. One cartridge, a sack of cornmeal, no trial, no fight. The elder women, whispering rows among them, looked away. The men didn't even pretend to care. Harlan Pike led her out barefoot. Just like that, she was gone. And now she sat in a cage like a mongrel at auction. The crowd thickened. One miner, Silas Kane, called out, $2. Another man waved a dented tin flask, hoping to trade instead. Amos snorted, swatting at a fly. She's worth $5, and not just for her muscle. You boys look like you could use the kind of company she provides. More laughter. One man mimicked the thrust of his hips. Ahiv fought the nausea rising in her gut. Her arms tensed around her knees. And that's when she saw him, a quiet man near the general store. He hadn't been there before. He stood still, one boot against a sun-bleached hitching post hat pulled low. Long coat worn thin with years. Dust-caked boots. Pale green eyes beneath the brim. One hand resting easy near his holster, not threatening, just familiar. Elias Whitaker hadn't come to Broken Mesa looking for trouble. He came for wire. Maybe some nails, oats for the horse. He rarely spoke. No one expected him to. Since the war, since losing Loretta, Jane Hollis to fever, and burying Jesse Whitaker before the boy's second birthday, Elias had become the ghost on the ridge. Just him, a stretch of broken fence and silence. But something in her eyes stopped him cold. It wasn't Amos Tate's bark. It wasn't the drunken jeers. It was her. Just a glance through the bars. but it told a whole damn story. One of betrayal, shame, and someone trying so damn hard not to beg. He stepped off the post and walked forward. Ahiv saw him move, and for a second something fluttered inside her. She didn't dare believe it, but she looked up, looked straight at him, and her voice broke the silence for the first time in days. "They sold me like I was nothing," she whispered, cracked and hoarse. "Please, save me." She hadn't meant to speak. It just came out raw and aching, but Elias heard it. He didn't speak, just stepped closer, reached into his duster coat and pulled out a gold coin. He tossed it. It spun in the air, caught the sunlight, and landed square in Amos Tate's filthy palm. $5, Elias said. "First words all day." Amos grinned wide. "Well, hell, you got yourself a fine little pet, mister." Laughter rang again, but Elias didn't even blink. He strode up to the cage. The key hung on a nail, and he reached for it. He didn't wait for permission. Elias Whitaker reached for the nail, took the key, and opened the cage door himself. Ahiv didn't move, not right away. She was used to men grabbing, yanking, barking orders, but this one didn't reach for her. Instead, he slipped off his weather-worn duster brown soft from years under sun and saddle and held it out to her in both hands. Quiet. No gesture, no command. She stared, half expecting a trick. But there was no hunger in his eyes, no leer. Just a coat. She reached out slowly, her hands trembling as she took it. The fabric draped heavy on her shoulders, warmth and pine and worn leather clinging to it. Then he turned toward his horse, walked, paused only when she stumbled behind him. He waited, let her catch herself. Then, without a word, he lifted her up behind the saddle. Gentle, firm, no roughness in his touch. Behind them, the townfolk of Broken Mesa murmured, laughed, even spat. But Elias didn't turn around. He climbed into the saddle, flicked the reins. The horse moved west. Ahiv clutched the coat tighter around her. Her body ached all over, despite the heat, despite the sun. She didn't know where he was taking her. Didn't ask. But there was something in the way he rode, steady, unhurried, like time owed him nothing. No shouting. No hands clawing at her. Just wind, silence, and the wide road west. She rested her forehead against his back. For the first time in days, she breathed. It wasn't a cage. Not anymore. They rode 3 hours without a word between them. The horse's hooves crunched over dry clay and gravel past sun-bleached scrub and jagged rock. The town behind them shrank to memory. The mesa ahead climbed slow, tall against a burning gold sky. No voices now. No wagons. No jeers. Only wind and hoofbeats. Ahiv clung to the saddle, the edge of his coat brushing over her legs. Her thighs screamed from the ride, raw and bruised from days bound. Her wrists still carried marks from the leather cords Amos Tate had used. She kept her eyes low, watching the rise and fall of Elias's back with each breath. She didn't know his name. He hadn't asked hers. But she remembered his eyes, calm, unmoving, not afraid. The way he looked at her in that cage, like she was a person, not a thing. Her mind drifted. Back to the sale, to the faces of her people. What was left of them? Why didn't she run? Why didn't she fight? But when they dragged her from the edge of the village, everything she might have run toward had already been lost. Her mother dead from fever last winter. Her father long gone, swallowed by some white man's prison. And Dakota, the war chief's son. She had defied him once. Just once. That was enough to be traded. She was handed off barefoot, sold like grain. No tears, no fight. No one looked back, but she was still breathing, That had to count. At last Elias slowed his horse. They came to a break in the stone ridge, a narrow trail that opened onto a bluff. Below them, tucked in the cradle of two pine-covered ridges, sat a small homestead. One low cabin roof slanted under its own weight. A lean-to, a shallow well. Pasture fenced off empty but wide. No smoke, no livestock, just silence. Elias dismounted, first boots crunching the packed dirt. He walked to the cabin, reached for the door, then turned, one hand lifted in a simple signal, "Stay put." Ahiv didn't move. She sat stiff in the saddle watching as he disappeared inside. He returned a minute later with a basin and a cloth bundle which he placed by the well. Then he came back to the horse and looked up at her eyes, steady, unreadable. He offered his hands. Not to pull her, just to help. She hesitated, then placed her fingers in his. He guided her down gently. Her feet touched earth hard and dry. She looked at him unsure. He nodded toward the well, then stepped away. It was the first time in days anyone had given her a choice. She limped forward, legs sore, the coat wrapped tightly around her. Elias leaned against the porch rail, arms crossed, watching the horizon, not her. That mattered. Ahiv worked the pump. Water splashed into the basin, cold, clean, shocking. She cupped it in her hands, washed her face, let it sting her cheeks and lips. When she looked over her shoulder, he wasn't watching. So she kept going. Arms, legs, dust and shame sloughed off in rivulets. She wanted to strip the dress off completely, but she didn't dare. Not yet. The fabric hung heavy with dirt and memory. As she wrung it out, the neckline slipped lower. She pulled Elias's coat tighter over her chest. He still didn't watch. Instead, he went inside. A few moments later, the door creaked again. He stepped out and set a tin plate down on the porch. Cornbread, dried meat, a tin cup of water. Then he sat on the top step. Said nothing. Watched the sky. And left the food right there for her. He didn't say a word. Just set the plate on the porch and eased down on the top step elbows, resting on his knees, his gaze fixed on the dying sun bleeding into the treetops. Ahiv stayed where she was watching him from a distance, unsure if this was real or another trick. But after a while, something in the quiet told her it was safe to move. Her legs were stiff, her steps uneven, and every bone in her body warned her not to trust it. She half expected the food to vanish before she reached it, or the door to slam in her face. But nothing happened. The man, Elias Whitaker, never looked her way, never flinched. She sat on the edge of the porch, not beside him, but close enough to hear his steady breath. 2 paces apart. That was as close as she dared. Her fingers trembled as she picked up the bread. She chewed slowly, carefully, even though her stomach twisted from hunger. The meat was tough, but she finished every bite. Drank the water down to the last drop, then folded her hands in her lap and sat still. She had no idea what came next. Whether this was just a stop on the road or the start of another kind of prison. Whether he'd want payment later or obedience. But he never looked at her. After a while, Elias rose without a word, gave her a single glance, not sharp, not cold, just recognition, then walked around back. She stayed frozen in place until she heard his boots return. Something soft dropped beside her. A blanket, then he opened the cabin door and stepped inside. But he didn't shut it. Just left it cracked wide enough to mean, if you need shelter, you can. Ahiv sat there for a long while, the blanket resting in her lap, untouched. The ache in her limbs was growing now, like pain returning to a limb once numb. Her throat tightened not from thirst, but from the kind of silence that came with having no idea where you belonged anymore. When the last orange faded from the sky and the wind turned still, she stood, carried the blanket with her. Inside the cabin was one room, small, plain, quiet. A bed in the corner, a wood stove with a low crackle, a table with 2 chairs and a trunk beside the door. Elias was crouched near the firebox, feeding in wood. He looked up briefly, then returned to what he was doing. No words. Just motioned to the bed, then pointed at the floor beside it, where a folded shirt and a pair of trousers waited neatly. They were clean. She didn't move. He didn't pressure her. After a few seconds, he gave a small nod, stood, and stepped outside, quiet, respectful, not fleeing, just giving space. She still didn't understand him, but she understood what it meant to not be watched, to not be touched without warning, to be given the right to choose. For the first time in what felt like forever, her jaw loosened. She shut the cabin door gently and turned the latch, not out of fear, but because for once she had something to lock a door for. The morning came gray and cold wind whispering through the wood-planked walls. A heave stirred under the rough wool blanket Elias had given her. She'd curled on the floor beside the bed, not in it. Couldn't bring herself to lie in something that had belonged to someone else. Not yet. His shirt and trousers still sat folded by the bed. Too big, clearly made for him. But clean. She hadn't worn them, chose instead to sleep in the tattered dress she'd been caged in, wrapped tight in his coat, because she hadn't decided yet if she was staying. A clatter from outside broke the quiet. She sat up slowly, ribs aching from wood and bruises, brushed her hair from her face, and stood barefoot. She peered out the window. There he was, Elias, behind the cabin sleeves, rolled up splitting logs in a practiced rhythm. The axe rose, dropped, split wood clean through. Again and again. No pause, no anger, just movement. He didn't look toward the cabin, didn't check to see if she was watching. Most men would. He didn't. She stepped away from the window, her gaze drifting around the room. That's when she saw the photo frame above the stove. She reached for it, slow, careful. The image inside was worn, edges curled and faded, but clear enough. A woman's soft smile. A baby in her arms. Same walls. Same cabin. She set the frame back down gently, fingers lingering on the wood. It explained the silence, the empty bed, the grief he carried like an old scar. Late morning, the door opened. Elias stepped in, brushing pine chips from his coat. He didn't speak, just nodded toward the chair by the table and moved past her to the basin. She sat unsure, hands in her lap, eyes lowered. He poured water from a jug, rinsed his hands, dried them on his trousers. Then he went to the shelf, pulled down a pot, and filled it with beans, smoked meat and water. Lit the stove. No fumbling, just quiet, practiced routine. She flinched once when he moved too close. Not because he was harsh, but because her body didn't know any better yet. Every move he made was measured, slow, never sudden, never loud. And for the first time in a long, long while, that silence didn't feel like a threat. It felt like something steady, something she could maybe, just maybe, trust. Every movement he made was slow, not hesitant, just respectful. Elias stirred the pot, then eased down into the chair across from her. The silence between them wasn't heavy. It didn't demand anything. After a while, he looked up and met her gaze. You got a name? He asked. His voice was low, rough-edged from disuse, but there was no edge to it. She hesitated, then nodded once. Ahiv. He gave the slightest nod. Elias, he said. Elias Whitaker. That was all. She wanted to ask, why did you do this? What do you want from me? What do I owe you now? But she didn't, and he didn't explain. Maybe that was mercy. Maybe it was something else. When the beans and meat were done, he handed her a tin plate, simple hot filling. She ate slower this time, not like a starving thing, more like a woman trying to remember how not to flinch. He noticed, but said nothing. After lunch, Elias pulled a second coat off a nail by the door, then grabbed gloves and a coiled rope. I'll be fixing the south fence, he said. If you want to keep warm firewood stacked behind the stove. He paused at the door. You're safe here. Another pause. I don't lock it. Then he stepped outside. Ahiv sat frozen for a long while after. The door didn't swing open. No voice came calling. She was alone. But not abandoned. She fed the stove a few more logs, then walked the cabin slowly. She didn't open anything. Just looked. The boots lined up near the wall, the rifle leaning near the window, a chair with a cracked leg half mended and left unfinished. Everything in the place was worn functional, nothing soft, nothing meant for comfort. This was a house made for surviving, not for living. She found an old cloth and wiped the table down, not because he told her to, because her hands needed something to do, something to claim. Later she stood in the doorway and looked out across the pale dirt and brittle weeds. Elias was off in the distance, crouched near the fence line, moving slow and deliberate. Alone. He worked like a man who hadn't had anyone watching him in a long time, like someone who didn't expect to be needed again. And that's when it hit her. He wasn't waiting for her to prove she was worth something. He didn't seem to want anything from her at all, and somehow that terrified her more than anything, because she'd never lived without fear, without someone deciding what she owed. That night they sat across from each other again, quiet, eating supper. When the fire sank low, Elias stood and nodded toward the bed. You take it tonight, he said. She blinked. I'll sleep out back, he added. Dry spot under the porch. She opened her mouth, unsure what to say. This man had paid for her, fed her, clothed her, and now he was giving up his own bed. He saw the confusion on her face. I ain't like them, he said, voice rough. I didn't buy you for that. Then he grabbed his blanket and coat and walked out without another word. Ahiv sat alone by the fire, staring at the dying embers. She didn't cry. Not yet. But something inside her cracked just a little. Not from fear, but from the quiet, aching weight of being treated like a person after so long, of being treated like nothing. When she finally climbed into the bed, she didn't sleep for a long while. But when sleep came, it was the deepest she'd had in months. And in the morning she didn't think about running. The sky was pale and soft with morning mist, the kind that clung low to the frost-bitten grass outside. Everything felt still. Ahiv woke alone. The bed creaked as she sat up sore, but less broken. The blanket still held a faint scent of pine smoke, and the man who'd given her space. The pillow was flattened but clean. She pulled Elias's coat over her shoulders again before standing. Her dress was still torn at the collar, frayed along the seams, the top edge brushing just above her chest. She crossed the room barefoot, glancing first toward the window. No sign of him. She listened, just birds, and the occasional groan of the roof as it settled. The cabin hadn't been touched. Everything was exactly as it had been left. She moved to the stove and began feeding it, kindling, mimicking the way she'd watched him do it the night before. She didn't know what time he'd return, but she wanted something warm ready. Once the fire caught, she stepped toward the cracked mirror above the wash basin. Her face looked thinner than she remembered. The bruises on her wrists had faded to yellow and green. Her lips were mending, but the eyes staring back at her, still cautious, still unsure. Her fingers drifted over the folded shirt and trousers Elias had laid out for her that first night. They were still there, still untouched, still hers if she wanted them. She paused for a moment, then reached for the clothes. Carefully, she slipped out of the torn dress, folding it as best she could despite the frayed seams, and set it aside. Most of the bruises had faded, though red marks from the ropes still traced her skin. She pulled the oversized shirt over her shoulders, rolling the sleeves up, then tied the pants at her waist with a worn strip of cloth. The fabric smelled of cedar and dry wind, rough but warm and whole. In the mirror, she didn't look like a prisoner, not even Apache. Just a woman trying to feel like herself again. Outside, the sound of hooves moved slow and steady. She stepped barefoot onto the porch. Elias Whitaker was riding in from the south pasture. A bundle of fencing trailed behind his saddle. His shoulders slumped under the weight, but his face held its usual calm. He didn't smile, he never did, but his head dipped the slightest bit when he saw her standing there. That was his version of a greeting. She moved aside as he passed. He tied off the horse and bent down to lift the bundle. Ahiv hesitated, then stepped down the porch and walked toward him. "I can help," she said. It was the first time she'd spoken on her own since the cage. Elias didn't react right away. He looked down at the bundle, then up at her. "You sure?" she nodded. "Together." They undid the straps and carried the planks toward the lean-to. Her arms were weaker than she remembered. She moved slower. But he never corrected her, never hurried her. When a plank slipped from her grip, he caught it without a word. She nodded in thanks. They worked quietly side by side, dust clinging to their clothes. By mid-morning, sweat lined the back of her neck. Elias wiped his brow and pointed toward the edge of the field. "Water hole's that way. Spring's fresh, I dig it out every few weeks." She walked slowly through the dry grass, each step steadier than the last. Kneeling, she cupped cold water into her hands and drank deep. Then she splashed her face and neck, letting it trickle beneath her shirt. She could feel his eyes on her, not in hunger, just watching. When she turned back, he looked away. They shared a quiet lunch at the cabin, jerky, a hunk of bread, a boiled egg. She noticed he always gave her more than he took for himself. She wanted to ask what he expected in return, but time kept answering for him. He didn't want anything. That made the silence between them easier to carry. After lunch, he spoke again. "I was married once." She froze mid-bite, not looking up. She passed. "Fever took our boy 2 days later. He wasn't offering it as a plea, just stating it. I don't bring folks here. I don't talk much, don't trust easy." She gave a slow nod. "I know that feeling." This time he looked at her, really looked. "You been running?" She nodded. "Since the river. I stayed ahead of him for 2 days before the trader caught me." "Your people," she paused. "They gave me away." He didn't press. Later, Elias showed her the chicken coop, just a few half-wild birds pecking at the dry feed. The roof sagged. She pointed. "You got nails in the shed." "I can fix it." He blinked, surprised. "You sure I've fixed worse?" He fetched the hammer and nails without a word, and set them beside her. Then he turned and walked toward the fence line. That day they worked in separate places, but the rhythm between them began to fall into place. By sundown, the roof was patched dust streaked her arms and cheeks. Elias came back, dropped his gloves on the porch rail, looked at the coop. She stood still, unsure if it was good enough. He gave a single nod. Good work. That night they sat by the fire. She watched his hands, their size, the scars, the steadiness. She reached across the table, touched his wrist lightly. Thank you. He didn't pull away. I didn't save you, he said. I just opened the cage. You gave me the first night I didn't feel like running. He looked at her, his expression unreadable, but his jaw eased like some weight had loosened. Neither of them moved. Not yet. But something shifted. She didn't sleep on the floor that night, and he didn't take to the porch. They stayed in the same room, clothed apart, but they stayed. And that meant more than words could. The next days passed not with grand changes, but with quiet ones that spoke louder. Elias didn't speak more than usual, but Ahiv noticed he left his tools out, now not hidden. The cabin door stayed open while he worked the land. And in the evenings, he stopped taking off his coat like someone always halfway gone. He hung it by the door like someone planning to stay. Ahiv stopped asking if she should leave. He hadn't offered her a reason to stay, but he hadn't once asked her to go. She swept the floor each morning, now wiped down the table after every meal, and fed the chickens before anyone had to say a word. She moved through the little homestead cabin like it was hers, not boldly, not loudly, but like a woman reclaiming space with every quiet step. It wasn't submission, it wasn't defeat. It was her way of saying, I'm still standing, and maybe, thank you. Still, Elias Whitaker had never once laid a hand on her. He watched her, always watched, but with restraint, not desire. When her shirt slipped low over her shoulder while hauling water, his gaze caught it, but didn't linger. When the wind tugged the fabric tight across her chest and the loose trousers hung low on her hips, he turned his face away, jaw clenching just a little. That more than any soft words earned her trust. He didn't want to claim her. He wanted her safe. But one night the wind changed everything. It was colder than usual. A sharp wind rattled the old frame of the window. Ahiv sat curled near the hearth, mending the ripped hem of her dress with the last thread she'd found in a drawer. Elias sat at the table nursing a cup of coffee, gone lukewarm eyes lost in the flicker of firelight. At last, he spoke. Anyone out there might come looking for you. His voice held no suspicion, only concern. She shook her head. No one, not even my own people. They gave me away for cornmeal, Elias. I ain't theirs anymore. He didn't ask further, just sat still. Then, after a stretch of silence, he said softly, You ain't property here. I know, she whispered. I'm not going to ask you for anything. She lifted her eyes to meet his. But what if I want to give something? His jaw tightened. You don't owe me a thing. I didn't say I owed, she said gently. I said I wanted to. He rose then, not quick, not rough, just steady. He crossed the room and knelt beside her. His hand hovered in the air, unsure, until she placed hers into it. Her fingers were warm, her palm soft even after all the days of work. He didn't kiss her, didn't pull her close. He just sat there beside her, her hand in his, while the fire popped and cracked. That night she lay once again in his bed. And this time Elias stayed in the room wrapped in a blanket on the floor, not because he didn't want to be near her, but because she hadn't asked. And Elias Whitaker was a man who didn't cross lines unless he was invited. In the quiet hours before dawn, with the fire burned low and cold air creeping in, Ahiv slipped out from the bed. She wrapped herself in the blanket and padded across the floor barefoot, her steps light but sure. She knelt beside him and whispered Elias. He blinked awake, and in the softest motion she leaned down and kissed his cheek, then rested her forehead against his. "I don't want to be afraid anymore," she said. His hand came up slow and careful, resting lightly against her back. Not pushing. Just there. "You don't have to be," he murmured. She slid under the blanket beside him. They didn't speak. They just lay close, her head on his chest, his arm beneath her shoulder. No hunger. No urgency. Just warmth. Quiet and human. Cloth against skin. Breath against breath. Their chests rose and fell together, and for the first time since that auction block, Ahiv slept without clenching her teeth. And Elias, he fell asleep, holding someone who wasn't already lost. By morning, there were no words to define what had changed, but something had. She poured the coffee, and he set out 2 cups, not just one. When he went to the field, she walked beside him, not behind. She stopped tucking in the shirt, rolled the sleeves to her elbows, let her shape show again, not for him, but for herself. And when he looked at her now, it wasn't to take, it was because he saw her speaking without saying a word. And for the first time, he was listening. Later that afternoon, Ahiv found an old saddlebag behind the lean-to. The seam had split. The leather was dry rotted. But it wasn't beyond saving. She asked if she could fix it. He said yes, no pause, no question. That was the moment she realized she didn't need to ask anymore. She belonged here, not because she earned it, but because she stayed. And so did he. The sun dipped slower now. The wind was losing its bite. Canyon Hollow might as well have been another life. This place, this land, this fire, these tools, this silence, this was their home now. Every morning, Elias rose before her, fed the fire. She'd feel him moving before she ever opened her eyes, the soft creak of wood, the scrape of tin on iron, the faint clink of mugs. He never woke her, but when she sat up, the coffee was ready. She wore the shirt loose now, belted the trousers with a leather strip she stitched herself, brushed her hair each morning, her body mended. Her voice was stronger. And that deerskin dress, the one she wore the day she was traded, like nothing hadn't been touched in a week, folded away at the foot of the bed. Their routines wove together like braided rope. She fixed the saddlebag, then the harness, then the fence post straps. Elias handed her broken things without asking, and she just took them like they both knew. She was home. It had become their unspoken code. But that morning Elias Whitaker stepped in from the barn with that quiet stillness in his stride that made Ahiv freeze. She was tending the fire. She turned and caught the storm on his face. His jaw was clenched tight, and his fingers curled around the doorframe like he might crush it. "What is it?" she asked. He didn't answer right away, just stepped further in and laid something on the table. A folded piece of parchment, creased and worn. A public notice. She moved closer. Her heart sank as she read. A bounty sheet. Names scrawled in ink barely legible. Apache women. Escaped. Labeled as stolen property. One of the names close enough to hers made her throat seize. Her eyes shot up to him. "Where'd you find this general store in town?" Elias said. "Tacked near the back wall." "Did anyone ask about us?" she pressed. "No, not yet. But if they do..." He left the sentence hanging like a blade. Ahav took a step back. Her breath came shorter now. I thought we were far enough. We are, for now. But fear seeped in like a draft beneath a door. She tried to stand tall, but her hand drifted to her waist. The belt there suddenly felt too loose, like she could be swept away. I don't want to run again, Elias. I won't let them take you. His voice struck like a hammer, calm but final. She looked at him, the scar cutting down his jaw, the steady eyes that never blinked away. Not even now. She didn't doubt him, but it didn't erase the danger. She moved to the window and scanned the ridge. Everything outside looked still. Too still. Maybe they won't come this far, she whispered. Maybe he replied. But if they do, I'll be ready. That evening, Elias brought the rifle out to the porch and cleaned it slow, methodical. He didn't say it was for her. He didn't mention the bounty. But they both knew. After supper, Ahiv sat near the fire, her hands empty for once. No mending left. No thread between her fingers. Just the weight of silence. She watched him, the way he sat, the way he held himself. Something pulled tight in her chest. She stood and crossed to him. He looked up but said nothing. She sank beside him on the wooden floor, close enough their knees touched. Then softly she took his hand and placed it on her hip. You don't have to carry this alone, she said. His eyes found hers. There was restraint, but behind it something else. Something long buried. You sure, he asked, voice barely more than gravel. I'm not scared of you, she said. Never have been. He exhaled sharp and quick, like a man who'd held his breath too long. Then he kissed her. Not rushed, not fierce. Steady. Grounded. His hand slipped from her hip to the small of her back, anchoring them both in something real. She leaned into him, hand brushing the scar along his jaw. No words passed between them. She took his hand and led him to the bed. They undressed not like strangers in heat, but like two souls shedding old skins. He kissed her shoulder, her collarbone. She traced the old bullet scar beneath his ribs. Their movements weren't born of lust, but of need, the need to be close, skin to skin, not to claim, but to comfort. Later she lay tucked against him. Her head rose and fell with his breath. One leg draped over his arm wrapped firm around her spine, thumb brushing slow across her waist. No words were needed. The silence held them. Come morning, when Elias stirred, so did she. She poured his coffee without asking. He watched her, a smile flickering at the corners of his mouth. Outside, a hawk circled above the pasture. They stood together at the porch steps, staring across the land. Winter's not far, he murmured. I'm not going anywhere, she replied. He turned, met her gaze. Didn't think you were. And that was it. Whatever came next, they'd face it side by side, not as captor and captive, not as savior and saved, but as two souls who had chosen to stay when staying meant everything. The first frost came quiet in the night. By morning, the field behind the cabin shimmered with thin ice. Yellowed grass blades had stiffened, snapping beneath Elias's boots as he stepped out to feed the horse. The sky stretched low and dull pale clouds dragging across the ridgeline. Winter hadn't arrived in full, but it had sent a warning. Inside, the fire snapped warm in the stove. Ahiv crouched beside it, coiling dry kindling near the hearth. She had learned how to keep flame through the dark hours, banking embers before sleep, waking early to stir them alive again. She moved with confidence now. No hesitation. Her sleeves were rolled high, her wind-tangled hair pulled back in a short, neat braid. The way she occupied the space had changed. This was her home now, not as a guest, not as someone Elias had once rescued, but as his equal in a land that asked for work and trust in equal measure. She had started placing things where they made sense to her. Her patched saddlebag hung near the door, and the extra pair of socks she'd stitched by hand lay neatly in the trunk. A tiny bunch of dried wildflowers was tied above the bed, not for show, but to remind her she was still alive. When Elias Whitaker came in dragging the cold in with him, Ahiv was already placing a tin cup on the table. He shrugged off his coat boots, scraping the wooden floor. "Snow will hit before the week's out," he muttered. Ahiv nodded. "I'll check the window seals again." He poured himself some coffee, took a sip, then met her eyes. "We need to haul in the last of the root cellar crates. If they freeze, we lose 'em. I'll help," she said. He didn't answer in words, just gave her a small nod. They spent the morning in the back field, digging the last carrots and potatoes out of the frost-hardened dirt. Their fingers turned red and stiff from the cold. Ahiv's sleeves were soaked to the elbows, but not a complaint left her lips. Elias offered her his gloves once hers were too thin, but she shook her head and kept on. By midday, they had the crates stowed away in the cellar by the lean-to. She brushed a streak of dirt off her cheek with the back of her hand and looked up at him, her breath misting in the chill air. "I used to hate the cold," she said. "Still do," he replied, "but it don't follow you inside." They both smirked just a little. That night she stood at the wash basin, toweling her hair dry while he stoked the fire. The flames cast a golden light across her bare shoulders. The collar of her shirt hung loose, dipping low against her chest, her skin still flushed from the warmth. He turned eyes dragging slowly over her, quiet, restrained, but undeniably there. She saw it. "I know you see me," she said softly. "I see you," he replied. "Do you ever wonder if we hadn't met there at the cage?" Her voice dropped low. He was silent for a beat. "I try not to," he said. "'Cause it's the only part I don't regret." She stepped closer. "I would have died, Elias, or worse." "I didn't come to save you," he said quietly. "I came for fence nails. But you stayed." He said nothing. She reached up, fingertips brushing the side of his neck. His body tensed, not with rejection, but with the weight of touch he hadn't known in so long. "I want you to touch me," she whispered. His breath left him slow. "You sure?" She nodded, guiding his hand to her waist. "I trust you." Their kiss this time was slower, not to erase anything but to say what couldn't be spoken. His hand slipped beneath her shirt, tracing her spine as she arched into him. Her lips grazed his jaw, his throat. He lifted her and carried her to the bed like something precious. No rush. No words. Their bodies moved together without shame, without hesitation. There was nothing desperate in it. It was reverent, quiet, steady. Her hands trembled against his chest, and he held her until they didn't. Every touch was earned, every breath honest. Skin against skin in the firelight, they built something sacred from the pieces of what had been taken from them. After they lay tangled in blankets, bare hide below, wool above, and silence holding them close, Elias stared at the ceiling. Ahiv rested her cheek on his chest, listening to the strong, steady beat of his heart. "I used to think I'd never want to be touched again," she murmured. His hand moved gently along her shoulder. "Me too." The next morning they moved like always, quiet, easy. She stirred oats over the fire. He brought in wood without needing to be asked. At breakfast, their knees bumped under the table, and neither pulled back. Later, while fixing the storm shutters, Elias asked her something that caught her off guard. "You want your own horse?" She blinked. "What for?" "If trouble comes, I don't want you trapped here. You think trouble will come? I think it always does, one way or another." She stared at him for a long while. "If we ride together," she said. "If we fight here." He nodded. And just like that, they started making plans not to run, but to endure. They weren't just surviving anymore. They were building something. 3 days later, the snow came. Not a light dusting. Not a warning. But a full, heavy fall. Silent and thick. By dawn, the world was gone beneath a white blanket. The roof groaned under the weight. The horse in the lean-to snorted steam curling from its nostrils. The cold was real now. Deep. The kind that sets into your bones. Elias woke first, like always. But he didn't rise right away. He just laid there, watching Ahiv sleep beside him. Her hair fanned across the pillow. One hand tucked beneath her cheek. Her breathing soft and steady. The blankets were drawn up to her shoulders, her warmth pressed against his side. He traced the curve of her back with his eyes the shape of her hip beneath the covers. She looked safe. That image stayed with him as he dressed and stepped out into the snow. By the time Ahiv woke, he was already shoveling a path from the porch to the well. She pulled on the thick, fur-lined coat he'd stitched for her and stepped outside. Arms crossed against the wind. Her breath came out in little clouds. "You'll wear yourself out," she called. He paused, leaning on the shovel. "Won't get easier if I wait." She walked over, grabbed the second shovel off the wall, and stepped down beside him. "Then don't wait alone." Side by side, they worked in silence. The only sound was the crunch of snow beneath their boots. The quiet felt sacred. No birds, no wind. Just two souls moving like they belonged to the land, and maybe to each other. When they returned to the cabin, Cheek's red fingers stiff Ahiv warmed water while Elias peeled off his scarf. He watched her for a moment. "You ever think about leaving?" he asked. She stopped mid-pour. He turned slowly. "Do you know?" "Then neither do I." They shared the basin, taking turns at the water drying off close to the fire's warm flicker. Elias watched her now as she moved through the room, not like a stranger testing its borders, but like a woman who'd laid claim. She belonged to it. Rooted. Settled. She reached for a flannel shirt hanging near the stove, slipped it on without a word. It fell past her hips, her figure filling the fabric with quiet grace. And when she looked at him, there was no bashfulness, only the calm, haunting certainty of a woman who knows she's wanted. Later that afternoon, Ahiv brought in the patched quilt and sat by the hearth, sewing in silence. Elias was outside fitting a new iron latch on the barn door. The sky stayed thick, and still gray clouds pressed heavy above the pines. It was the kind of day the world paused just long enough to remind you what mattered. They were halfway through supper when a sound came. 3 slow, deliberate knocks against the cabin door. Elias went rigid. So did Ahiv. He stood his hand drifting instinctively to the rifle, leaned beside the woodpile. Their eyes met hers, steady, unafraid. She gave a small nod. She moved to the wall near the wash basin, out of sight, but not hiding. Just waiting. Elias opened the door slowly. A man stood outside, snow running off the brim of his hat coat, drawn tight boots caked with travel and miles. His eyes were hard, cold, watchful. "Evenin'," the man said. Elias didn't speak, just studied him. "You Elias Whitaker?" "That's right. I'm looking for a woman, Apache, about yay tall, might go by a hiv." The muscles in Elias's jaw tightened, but he didn't move. "What's she to you?" The man shrugged. "Nothing much. I just get paid to find her. Word is she got sold. Rancher took her." Elias stood firm. "Can't help you." The man's eyes slid past him, trying to peer into the cabin's warmth. "Mind if I take a look around, I do. You hiding something?" Elias's voice was flat. "But you're not coming inside." The man didn't move, but his smile faded. "Ain't looking for trouble. Just doing my job. You sure you haven't seen her?" Elias didn't blink. "I've seen a lot of things. Don't mean I remember the ones that don't belong to me." A silence stretched sharp enough to snap wood. The man exhaled, took one last glance at the cabin's shadowy interior, and nodded. "Well, appreciate the time." He turned and stepped down into the snow, his long coat flapping like a vulture's wings. Elias didn't shut the door until the man had vanished into the timberline. Then a heave stepped from the dim corner. "You think he'll come back?" Elias nodded. "Maybe. Or maybe he'll send someone else." She came closer. "What do? We stay ready, but we don't run." Then he turned to face her. "No," he said, firmer now. "We don't run." That night she didn't sleep fast. She lay beside him, wide awake beneath the dark ceiling beams. "Elias," she whispered. If they come again. If they try to take me, they won't. But if they try..." He turned, laid his palm along her cheek. "They'll have to go through me first." She didn't cry. But in the darkness, her hand found his and held on. Neither of them slept deep, but neither turned away. Morning would come, and with it whatever trouble waited out there in the pines. But for now, they stayed. Because staying was the only way they'd ever learned to fight back against the world that kept trying to take what was theirs. The man didn't return the next day, or the one after. But the silence he left behind wasn't peace. It was a shadow, a promise. Elias started making changes, quiet ones. He moved the rifle from behind the stove to right beside the bed, boarded up the back window tighter. Each morning before dawn, he walked the boundary of the ranch, searching for prints in the frost. Never said much, but Ahiv saw it in his shoulders in the way they stayed tight, always listening. He wasn't scared, just ready. And she made preparations of her own. She packed a small satchel, not to leave, but to be ready. Inside a pouch of dried corn, a clean shirt, a bone-handled knife. The pendant she'd worn as a girl, 2 pairs of wool socks she'd stitched from scraps. She closed it tight. And didn't speak of running. Not seriously. They still cooked together. Still shared the same bed. Still kissed in the hush between chores like it was a new language only they understood now. He touched her differently, never fast, always certain, and she answered him with a kind of strength that only came when a woman knew no one would hurt her again once the sun went down. One dusty afternoon, about a week after the stranger's arrival, Elias Whitaker handed Ahiv a small wooden box. No words, no build-up. He just placed it in her hands and stepped back, watching as she slowly lifted the lid. Inside was a ring, plain silver, shaped from a horseshoe nail, smoothed by hand. No stone, no decoration, just honest metal. But it was whole. Her breath hitched. Elias cleared his throat. "I wasn't sure how else to ask," he said quietly. "Maybe I should have waited till spring, given a speech or something." He looked away. "But I ain't that kind of man." She met his eyes glassy with emotion. "Elias, I want you to stay," Ahiv said, voice soft. "As my husband. Not because you rescued me, not because I owe you anything, but because I can't picture this life without you anymore." She shut the box gently and stepped into his space, resting her palm against his chest. "I already stayed," she whispered. "Now I just want to belong." He kissed her, then slow, sure as if he finally understood what it meant to come home. No date was set. They didn't need one. That night, the ring slid onto her finger, and the next morning she wore it while making breakfast like it had always been there. But peace never lingers long in the West. 2 weeks later, another rider showed up. This one didn't knock. Elias spotted him from the ridge at dawn, a lone figure in a long black coat rifle strapped across his back, bearing down on the cabin. Elias didn't flinch. He stepped outside with his rifle and called out behind him. "Inside. Lock the door." Ahiv didn't hesitate. She did exactly that, then moved to the window with her own weapon, an old revolver Elias had cleaned and handed to her a few days earlier. The rider dismounted 20 feet from the porch. Hands raised, voice steady. "I'm not here for a fight." Elias kept his gun trained. "You were sent." The man nodded. "I was, but I ain't one of them. I'm her kin." Elias narrowed his eyes. The man reached into his coat and pulled out a necklace bone carved like a hawk's claw. Inside, Ahiv gasped. Her fingers found the matching pendant tucked deep in her satchel. Elias heard it and flicked a glance back. "It's true," she said. "That's my mother's line." Elias stepped off the porch slowly, though the rifle stayed raised. Only once the man spoke did he finally lower it. The man's name was Chaitan, her cousin. He'd been exiled long ago. Heard rumors. Whispers that she'd been sold. Gone. He hadn't come to take her back. Just to warn her. "There's no bounty anymore," he said. "The one who listed you Harlan Pike, he's dead. Shot 2 towns over in a scuffle. No one's chasing you now. It's done." Elias watched him a long moment before lowering the barrel fully. Ahiv stepped outside, breath held tight. She hadn't seen Bloodkin in over a year. Chaitan hugged her briefly firm, not lingering, like a man who still honored the old ways, but didn't need to say much. He stayed the night, then rode off. Before leaving, he turned in the saddle and called back, "She chose to stay with you. That counts. Treat her right." Elias nodded. "Already do." That spring came early. Snow peeled back in soft ribbons. Hills greened. Birds filled the trees again. And as the earth thawed, something else stirred something neither had spoken aloud. It was Ahiv who broke the silence. One morning, while Elias still blinked sleep from his eyes, she placed his hand over her belly. "Elias." He stirred, then looked down. Her fingers clasped his. "I think we made something." He didn't move at first, just breathed, then tightened his hand ever so slightly. The truth settled in his chest like steady fire. He didn't cry, didn't speak for a long while. Then, finally, "We'll raise them right," he whispered. She smiled. "I know." By late summer, the cabin had a second room. The barn roof was patched. The coop now held 6 hens, not just 3. And out on the porch rail, carved with Elias's old hunting knife, were 2 initials, W+N. Not for possession, but for memory. Because what started in a cage for $5 in a cruel town became something else entirely. A home, and a kind of love that didn't need vows or spectacle to be real. Only the quiet act of staying, and never leaving. If this story has touched your heart, I invite you to stay with us to discover more true tales of the Wild West. Stories that honor resilience, tenderness, and the spirit that God placed in those who blazed the trail. Subscribe, share, leave your thoughts in the comments, and join us once again to journey across this untamed land. Thank you.